Today will be, or I think Jeff has a couple of slides. We'll see if we can actually see it sometime soon, on motor output of the cortex and possibly involving the superior corticolus. So I know Scott studied this, right, or was interested at some point. So we'll see. And then I think we need to reserve a little bit of time as necessary to kind of decide on the topics for the mini focus week. So that's coming up next week, next Wednesday through Friday. I think that means that we're not going to have our regular like Wednesday meeting here. So if you're not a researcher, I guess, I mean, you're welcome to show up.
It's just going to be longer, right?
Yeah, it's just going to be longer. Yeah. And it's going to happen for 3 days. So
Yeah.
There you go. All right. So yeah,
So am I
difficulties
up
aside.
then? So I start?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess I've been trying to think about, preparing for our little, I guess you can't call it offsite focus meeting. And so I've been the last few weeks, I'm working through lots of big issues that I don't think I understand very well. And a lot of it has to do with the nature of how the whole system works in a hierarchy. We've defined very clearly hierarchical relationships between models and composition, but what's the nature of motor output in a hierarchy is one of the issues. I think last week we talked about attention. That's related to hierarchy. Anyway, so I've been just focusing a little bit on like, how do I understand motor output in a hierarchy? Specifically, like how do you understand the motor output of a column that's not, getting direct sensory input? What is it moving and how does it do things? So that was a problem I was thinking about. I have a little write-up on it. I don't know if it's worth, I'll just show it to you just in case. I have to share it first. Let me share my screen. Yeah. So hopefully you can see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but these are notes I was writing to myself, and basically saying, how do we understand motor output in a column higher up in the hierarchy? And then made a point of that we're so far we've been focused on mostly primary columns and regions. Oops, oh gosh, stop that. And so that's easy because if you can imagine a V1 column corresponding with a patch in the retina and say, oh, how to move the patch in the retina, or S1 column corresponding to a patch on skin, so how do I move that? But when you get to higher up columns, they're multimodal inputs, and it's not clear what they correspond to. And then I came to a basic conclusion, which is perhaps not even new anymore, but maybe I forgot or I just didn't understand it. Is that when I used to think about when a column is outputting information and motor output, right? Remember, in layer 5 is the only output layer of a column, right? And it's a motor output layer. That's the only thing that leaves the cortex. And I used to think of like a V1 column's telling how the retina how to move, or S1 column's telling how the fingertip to move. But since it doesn't work higher up in the hierarchy, and we have to have a common cortical algorithm, what's the right answer? What's the right way to think about it? The right way to think about it is a column is basically saying, I want to observe this part of a model. I want to observe, I want to know what's at some location in my model. And apparently this is how we do it already in Monty. I didn't understand this, but Monty basically in the communications protocol would say, give me this location. But I hadn't been thinking about that way. So to me, all of a sudden they're saying, okay, so a column doesn't really tell how it wants something to move. The column just says what it wants to observe. And so I started thinking about that and looking into it. And so then I started doing some just some reading about the superior colliculus. And so I'm just going to switch to that right. So hopefully you can see this picture. Mm-hmm. I knew the superior colliculus is always involved in eye movement. I've always known that. The eyes project directly to the superior colliculus, and so does the visual columns in the cortex. And I knew it had something to do with some other modalities, but I didn't really know much about it. So I did a little bit of reading on it, not a lot of it, a few papers. And what I learned was pretty interesting. So on the left here is a picture from, I can show you, it's a chapter in a book, but I can show you where it's from. And it's showing you this is some kind of animal. And the supercollicus is just on top of the brainstem. It's just two little white ovals there. And the surface of the supercollicus maps into, and you can think of a location completely surrounding the body or the head of the animal. So you see the sphere around the animal. Every point on the surface of the supercollicus maps to one of those points. It's sort of like the space around the animal. And it's a nice map. So the local contiguous points on the supercollicus represent contiguous points in space. And then so that's this sort of map laid on top of the structure. So the cells respond to that, and then there's layers of cells that go perpendicular to the surface. So that's in the upper hand picture here. You can see that they show one little circle, which is called the visual map, and then below it they have an auditory map. And it turns out if you keep going down, you get a somatosensory map. There's a whole bunch of these maps that are in there. And the thing about it is that these cells correspond to the same locations in space, but they are driven and they have outputs related to those different modalities. So the auditory map also maps out sounds in the same sphere around the animal, the visual map and tactile map. And when you activate a bump on this of activity, shown by the little circle with the red center in it, all kinds of stuff can happen. So, and what happens is the supercollicus can generate lots of coordinated actions. So, for example, if you put a bump on this visual map, not only do the eyes move to the location that you put where the bump is, but the head turns and the body can turn. If it was a human, your eyes would move and your head would move and your shoulders would move. All the things you just automatically do to visually attend to some point in space. If you're an animal like a cat or a bat that have ears that can move, the pinnae can move, the ears move as well to tend to that space. So essentially, by activating a location in the space of the animal, a series of coordinated actions occur using all different kinds of muscle groups to attend to that space. And the attention doesn't have to just be visual. You'll attend auditorily to that space. It'll actually, in humans, they've shown that you move your limbs to those locations under certain conditions. This is all happening subcortically. So it's essentially, you can think of the supercollicus as a mechanism for generating coordinated actions to attend to some location in body space. And that was a really cool. I didn't know this. Maybe other people knew this already. I didn't know this. So that's a pretty cool idea. And what it says is that if like when any cortical region wants to tend to something, he says, I want to know what's at this location. Subcortically, a whole series of coordinating actions occur to make that happen. It's not like you're just moving your eyes. So on the right here, I drew a little drawing of my interpretation of this. So we show one column, and the column has a model-based world. It doesn't know anything else. It just knows about its models. And it wants to generate movement relative to the model. I say vectors because I think in the brain it's all vectors. It's movement vectors, whereas in Monty I understand we're doing locations. But in the brain, it's all movement vectors, I'm pretty certain. And so it says, okay, I want to move in this direction on the model. And then, as we've talked many times in the past, it can convert that movement vector in layer 5A. It gets converted into a body-centric coordinate system. We've been kind of loosey-goosey about what that means. I sometimes think, it's a retinocentric or head-centric or whatever. But let's say it's a body, completely relative to the body, just like this Colliculus. And so the column then activates a point in the space of the Colliculus, which is a point in the body space. And the Colliculus figures out how to generate movements to get input from that location. So, column again says, I want to know what's at this location on this object, converts that to body space. The Colliculus says, I will get you some input that comes from there. And so on the drawing I drew, I show a gray circle and a line indicating where the attention might be now, and then it moves it over to where it's been requested to.
Does that mean the superior colliculus has kind of a model of body parts and how to move them to get to places, or
It does seem that way. And so I'm going to make an argument in a moment that I think it has to learn this, that somebody subcortically has that model, right? Somebody subcortically. I don't know if it's all in the superior colliculus, because the superior colliculus activates other things, but subcortically there are models of behaviors that are independent of the models of the cortex. They're sort of body models, right? Like, so, right, they're body models. Now, if you watch a child developing, they have very poor ability to do this, right? You know, they can't catch a ball, they can't move and grab things and so on. And so either they're developing it or they're learning it, but there's a lot of evidence that you learn this. At least parts of it are learned. So obviously some of it can't be learned, like how to move the eyes. You know, there's new circuitry that's genetically determined for moving the eyes, but how do you coordinate that with the head and the shoulders and so on? I think a lot of that's learned. Yeah, so that's the implication of this.
And then, yeah, does that mean there's something like a grid cell representation in the superior colliculus that represents the space around the body?
I don't think so. I thought about that. I don't think it suggests that. There's no problem solving going on here. This stuff is kind of like, it's learned, but it's kind of hardwired. So like, I don't think it can do path integration. So the way I've been viewing it is, you've got these, let's say, you have these certain hardware, these learned things that you can do. It says, okay, I want to go to this location and grab something. That can all be coded, but if it can't be done, then the cortex has to get involved. If there's something that prevents this motor sequence from executing properly, then it can't solve it on its own. And then the cortex has to get involved and say, like, well, wait, we have a problem here. How are we going to get around this? So I think it's a model, but it's not the kind of model we're talking about in the cortex. I debated whether I use the word model for it or not.
Yeah, but there's also a reference frame that can integrate these movements that come from layer 5A to update the location in the body space.
Well, no, I mean,
it would just be one reference frame.
Right. But that movement is pretty simple. Well, right. You're basically moving through the body space map of the superior colliculus. Or here's the way I think it works. Okay, so this it's a little weird, and it relates to the discussion you and I were having the other day, whether these are movement vectors or locations that are specified. So what it looks like what happens, I was reading one about eye movements and head movements. Okay, so follow me on this one. It's a little complicated. You want to attend a new place visually. What it looks like it happens is almost it goes in a series of hops. It's like, if it can't do it all at once, it's like, it saccades a bit, your head turns, it saccades a bit, your head turns, saccades a bit, your head turns. It's almost like a series of locations, but not, it's more like, you can't jump too far across the surface. So you might imagine there's a bump of activity, and you're kind of moving that bump, and as you move the bump a bit, and then the the active neurons follow it, and you move the bump a bit, and the active neurons follows it. It doesn't have to have like there's no evidence it has anything like grid cells, and that it can do path integration like we talk about it. It's more like you have this bump and you can push the bump along in a certain direction or lead it in a certain direction. I don't know how to better describe that. I didn't come across any papers talking about the actual mechanism for how this worked, but I didn't look very hard either.
So does that then lean a bit more towards layer 5 communicating locations in body space instead of?
No, I'm pretty damn certain that a column is going to be communicating in vectors. But it does lean that more, it suggests that way. So to me, it's more like, okay, it's almost like there's something in between. I don't have the answers that way yet. I don't think layer 5A is outputting location. I just don't think that. But I could be wrong. I think columns get vector input, when the eye is moving, like we've talked about how from the magnocellular cells, when the eye is moving, it's basically you're going to get flow information. It's going to be motion, and the layer 6 minicoms look like motion, movement vectors. So I think the column works with movement vectors, but somehow those movement vectors have to get turned into the ability to move this bump along body space. I don't know yet how it does that. I didn't focus on that at all, really.
I mean, what would speak against there being a grid cell-like mechanism, like a simplified version of it even? I mean, it wouldn't ever need to re-anchor or anything because it's always relative to the body. It doesn't need to re-anchor to a different environment or anything. And
right.
it would just take the movement vectors and integrate them.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, one of the grid cell theories is the one, remember there's 2 grid cell theories. There's the oscillating interfering oscillators, and the other one was what was it called?
Continuous attractor network.
Yeah, continuous attractor. This looks more like the continuous attractor kind of system, where you have a bump of activity and you're just pushing it. So Vivian, you may have better ideas on this than I do. I don't know. I didn't see any evidence of people talking about complex neural mechanisms like that. I didn't see any discussion about how this stuff occurred. Another thing, another complication is, I'll show in a second here. I'll just do it right now. The same mechanism is involved when you have sort of unexpected sensory input. So this would be a bottoms up input. I'm showing it as a down arrow, but it's still a bottoms up input. And we've talked about like when someone opens the door in a classroom and everyone turns their head to look at it. That's the mechanism we're talking about here. Or if you hear a funny sound in some direction, your head turns towards it. Or if you feel something on your body, you automatically, if you feel a little bite on your skin, your body moves in a certain way. So these are unexpected sensory inputs. These also go through the superior colliculus, and they also generate body movement. And it seems, this is my personal observation, is that when that happens, it ignores what the cortex is asking for. This is the classroom example. And this pericolliculus generates body movements to basically tend to where the unexpected input occurred. Now that unexpected input is certainly not going to be a vector. It's just going to be some location in the space. So this body space is representing, it's clear that it's mapping onto these sensory organs. And so if there's a part of the retina that is getting some input you didn't expect, it's going to generate a bump in the body space in the superior colliculus. So this would argue that the superior colliculus is just saying it's not doing any kind of path integration. It's just saying, bump here, move there. So I'm not making any conclusions here. I'm just making some more observations. So this whole idea of which I'm pretty confident the cortex deals with movement vectors and grid cells. I don't know how that translates into the bump on the superior colliculus.
That all sounds, the same as like what I might take away from reading about all this stuff over the course of the sort of Salience type project and everything. But I'm curious to hear your take on one sort of debate we had internally about what body space means here exactly. Especially given that the movements tend to be sort of orienting. Is this body space like a real 3D space, or is it basically equirectangular / retinotopic coordinates?
I don't know the answer to those questions, Scott. I just don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't read deeply. I read like 3 papers on this, and there's a lot of papers. So I don't know the answer to that question. I had a lot of questions too. The way sometimes they talk about it's just like it's like a 2-dimensional space around the body, but clearly I perceive the depth as well, right? I have 3 dimensions of the space around my body. And they talk about the map as if it's 2 dimensions at times. But, if I hear a sound or if I'm attending to something, I'm given a 3-dimensional coordinate for it. It's not just in a particular direction, it's also a distance. So that was another thing that wasn't clear to me, how that 3 dimensions of the map are manifest on this guy. So I don't know if that's related to your question because you used some words I didn't know, Scott.
Yeah, that's basically yeah, so I think so if I could just ask you to elaborate on this depth part a little bit, I guess, because if I think about just pure retopic coordinates, yes, depth can be sort of pre-processed or I'm not actually sure where the depth sort of aspect comes in here, actually, in the superior calculus, given that an eye motion to, 10 degrees to the right, 5 degrees down, that's going to hit every depth that there is, right?
Right.
You know.
But when you think about think about introspection, when I attend to a point, I know where it is in 3 dimensions. I'm not, it's sort of like the cocktail problem, cocktail party problem. It's, I'll use this example I've used a lot, like walking in my room at night, right? And I can't see, and yet I want to get to the bathroom from my bedroom. And so I know there should be a wall, the corner of the wall as I enter the hallway. And since I can't see it, I reach out with my hand, but I kind of know where it is. It's not like it's just somewhere in that direction. It's not like, 3 inches or 4 yards away. It's about 3 feet from me, or 2 feet or something like that. So I have this definite sense of depth. And I think that would be true if you think about the models we're thinking about. If our models in the cortex are 3-dimensional, then you're moving to and you're trying to attend to some new location on the coffee cup or something like that, and you want to move your finger to that location. It's not, it's a complex pattern. It's not just like scan in this direction. It's like, no, there's a location in space. So I clearly have a 3-dimensional body space map. And I tend to locations in that 3-dimensional body space map. And so I'm assuming the superior colliculus does this too. Although I didn't look for it. It might be in the literature. I don't know.
Yeah, even with moving your eyes, you still can do the accommodation where the muscles can flatten the lens more or less to focus at different distances. Like when you think of if you look at something, but you're actually staring off into the distance, it becomes blurry.
Right.
Your eyes can definitely focus for different distances,
and also
you can anticipate what you need for where you're looking.
They can converge too, right? So you have convergence as well, indicating how far away something is. Yeah. So there are a lot of questions I had about this, which I don't have the answers to. But what I found is just amazing is I started reading about this and I realized how complicated these behaviors can be that are subcortical. Things that I might used to think like, oh, is cortex going to involve in doing all these things? I'm saying, oh, maybe not at all. It sort of just says a column in the cortex says, I need to move to I want to observe some location in some allocentric space. And I want, someone else is going to make that happen. I even started thinking like a large part of walking could be like this. It's known that the mechanics of walking are not controlled by the cortex, but it might even be something as simple, what if I'm walking down a path in the woods and I might see some location up ahead I want to get to, might be 10 feet from me or something like that. You don't really pay too much attention what you're seeing on the ground and it's not like you're attending to all the little rocks and things. It just sort of happens. And it makes me wonder, like, even something like that, where complex walking, where I'm balancing and moving around obstacles, that could all be subcortical. And it just says, I've learned how to, walk and get from here and step around things. It's kind of mind-boggling to me to think about it. If I really just say the cortex is going to try to get to some location, The subcortex can do a lot of the heavy lifting for this. Clearly, if there's something that the subcortex doesn't know how to do, it's like it's a new type of behavior, or there's an obstacle, or something doesn't work right, just haven't learned it, then cortex has to get involved and has to like, say, okay, oh, well, here's a problem. How are we going to get around this problem? Or, something unusual happened that the subcortex couldn't control. I'm reminded watching my grandchildren learn to catch a ball. Initially, they want to catch the ball comes to them, and their hand, the ball could almost land right in their lap practically, but the reaction time to catch it is too slow. It's like the ball's there and the ball bounces away before their hands get close. And of course, they practice this and they get much, much better at it. And I'm thinking to myself, I bet you all that learning is subcortical. It's the brain doesn't want to get involved in thinking about exactly ball trajectories. And you think of like a professional baseball player, for example, how quickly they have to do these things. So I think a lot of these behaviors, which I used to think were maybe cortically controlled or involved, or I just didn't think about it clearly, or I just didn't think about it enough. I now think, oh, there's a lot of subcortical stuff going on there. By the way, there's equivalent structure in non-mammals. It is called the optic tectum. It's just the superior colliculus by a different name, and it works the same way. And of course, it works with fish and wiggling their tails and their electric field sensors and things like that. So apparently, and then of course, in mammals, bats have a very they have this ear movement and clicking mechanism that it's all controlled here in the superior colliculus. So this is the general method that nature's come up with to say an animal wants to attend to some location, which could also be moved to that location, because to attend to it, you might have to move there. Or you have to move some parts of your body to attend to it. And it's somehow controlled through this similar mechanism that is either partially, it's either fully genetically controlled or partially genetically controlled. I'd argue, for a fish, it might be all genetically controlled, but for humans, it's partial. We clearly learned this. I just have one more slide here. I'll just show it to you. So these are some of the observations I had. So these are guesses. None of this. These are my interpretations. Subcortical motor behaviors are at least partially learned. I made that argument so far. And then I more think about it, I said, wow, I think there's a lot of stuff you can learn to do this way. They're independent of cortical models, and they can be applied to any cortical model. So anybody can say to the superior colliculus, any part of the cortex can say, attend to this space, and the superior colliculus will do it for that part of the cortex that asked for that. So if these are learned behaviors in subcortex or partially learned, then they can be applied to many different scenarios. I mentioned this is a general mechanism. There's evidence, very clear. It's not just evidence. They've shown this applies to whiskers, echolocation, moving the ears. That's the pinnae. I mentioned the optic tectum. And so a lot of people discovered all kinds of maps that map into the same basic mechanism. Then I asked myself, how sophisticated, number 4, how sophisticated can these behaviors be? And I mentioned this already. I'm running from point A to point B. Can you avoid obstacles? Then I started thinking like typing and piano playing and car driving. There seems to be sort of an interplay between cortical models. And when we get really good at something, I used to always assume that means we just push the model down in the cortex, which may still be true, but it also means the subcortex could relieve some of these things. I mentioned piano playing because there's one or typing, once your hands are located, you can only type when your hands are in the correct position. It's not like a general movement problem solving thing. I mean, you can type by thinking about it slowly, but so a lot of things that are sort of, just easy to do, we don't really think about, even complex behaviors could be learned subcortically relieving the cortex, and that's how we get better and better at it. Number 5 is it brings up the question about how flexible is the boundary between these two things, right? I mentioned this already. If the subcortical behavior fails for some reason, then the cortex has to get back involved and slow down and say, well, what's going on here? How do I solve this problem? And if the subcortex is learning, then that changes what the cortex has to do. So anyway, and then finally, this is the thing I know the least about, which is Monty. I was talking to Vivian and says, Monty has something similar. Monty tells the sensor, like, I want to observe this location, and doesn't worry about how it's done. But this is a more broad version of that. And so, will we want to take advantage of this? How would we take advantage of this and expand upon it? I was going to preface this whole talk saying it's going to be pretty short, but I didn't want to bring up old jokes, but I'm really done. To me, this is like, I need to spend more time thinking about this, as opposed to here's how it works, type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty significant shift. And I mean, we used to we're going to only do or model the cortex and not really the subcortical parts, but this kind of brings the possibility that we might need to do.
Well, I think we didn't really do it in our simulators. Isn't it true? What I heard from Vivian the other day was like, in our simulators, we just say, go to this location, and we just assume
the simulator
does it.
I was going
to
just mention that, yeah. But like, I remember when I first started, like in the first few months, I was like, are we gonna, maybe I brought this question, like, are we gonna have like a different kind of learning module where like our current learning modules are modeling external things in the world, but I felt like they're in the brain, there must be more learning modules dedicated to like modeling our body parts.
I know. I wouldn't call this learning module. At the moment, I don't think it's anything at all like what a cortical column is.
Yeah. So yeah. So I mean.
Yeah,
I guess at that point. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, yeah, finish your thought.
Okay. Like at that point, I guess at that point in time, I guess I was thinking that like, okay, everything is going to be like learning module / cortical column. So like, even if it's subcortical, it should be. I mean, it doesn't need to be learning.
Well, I had the same idea, right? I used to think like, the wear pathway would be modeling body space or something like that. And it may still be doing that, or it might be doing what Vivian's proposed, which is modeling, behaviors of object. But that either doesn't matter. Either way, it's very clear that there are sophisticated behaviors. There was a study, one paper I briefly read, I need to read it more, but they had humans with their brains exposed or something like that. I forget what it was. Okay. They poke the brain and the spray colliculus, and the human moves their arm. Do a very coordinated movement to touch some space. It's like, wow, that's amazing. Anyway, for Monty, we have a choice here. We haven't really talked too much about embodiments and what kind of bodies we have and what behaviors they have. I found this kind of freeing in the sense of the following way. If we ever really want to build robots, right? They have all this complex machinery, and we don't really want to have to control that. I mean, we as the Thousand Main Project. And so lots of people are figuring out how to get robots to run around and do things and balance and, let them do that. We just need to have a controlling system that says, all right, get to this location and tell me what's here, that kind of thing. And let someone else take care of all that other stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty fitting because Tristan and I were just talking about basically these topics, but in Monty, because I don't know. Could you pull up that picture again? The first slide.
Yeah.
Let me see. Can I do
this one here?
Yeah. And maybe the next one where it also shows the input from unexpected sensory input.
Right. Well, some of this I made up, some of it I didn't. First of all, it's very well known that the sensory organs go directly to the supercolliculus, especially the vision, and to the cortex. And I think it's been known for a long, long time that the supercolliculus coordinates these kind of reactions where, you like the classroom type of thing. Okay, anyway, what do you want to say here?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to do pointing on your screen, but
You got a nice
someone
arrow it's labeled.
made an arrow. Anyways, I guess I can just draw. It doesn't let me delete the arrow anymore either. But yeah,
Okay.
basically, Tristan and I were talking about it in terms of the project that Scott and him are currently working on, which is integrating saliency-based policies into Monty. So basically, that's kind of this part where the sensor module or the sensor is sensing something very salient, and then it sends a goal state, a goal to the motor system. So superior colliculus would be motor system in Monty in this case right now. And so basically, so far we had the learning module, so the column that could send a goal to the motor system, and that was a location and orientation in space. And now Scott has been working on for the past months, what he also showed him and Jose during the focus week, on a mechanism to take kind of salient sensory input and also turn that into a state, sending a goal location to the motor system and basically telling it, all right, look at that place because that's very salient. And so both of these are sending locations to look at or to sense at to the motor system, and then the motor system needs to figure out how to execute that movement or how to move to sense at that location. And so kind of a question that Tristan brought up was then, so how does the motor system know how to execute that action and which policy to use for it? Because up to now, when the learning module sent a target location, we would basically just teleport there. Now with this kind of sensory input, we also want to saccade there, like without teleporting, just kind of quickly saccade there, rotate the camera. How do we know when we want to just saccade versus when we actually want to move the entire body? Plus, we're hard coding a lot of knowledge about the agent's action space and about how it can move into the motor system. Like none of it is currently learned. And so I think, yeah, just an interesting topic to explore more is like what kind of learning would be happening in the superior colliculus. How would it learn how to execute different, like how to get to locations? How would it pick whether to move the eyes or the entire body to look somewhere? Like, how does it figure these things out?
Right. Well, I just have to believe a lot of this is, genetically determined. But then it can learn, it seems like it can learn on top of it. So there isn't a clear answer to that kind of question,
Yeah.
Like here, this is one of the things I read. This is interesting. So you want to visually attend to some space. So the eyes start moving in their sockets. And a little bit later, just very short, while the eyes are moving, the head starts turning. Okay. And now the eyes and the head are moving. The eyes reach their destination and they fixate, but the head's still turning. And so now the eyes are rotating counter in those sockets to maintain the fixation on the point while the head finishes its turn. Now, this is observed, okay? It's like, what a crazy system. So I asked myself, well, why is the head turning? And I'm thinking, well, if you're confronted with something dangerous or something that's surprising, not only do you want to quickly see what it is, but you probably want to position your body in a way that you could react better to it. So you want to get your body turned first your head, and then your whole body has to follow too. And so I bring this up because this is a complex behavior that seems, from an evolutionary point of view, is important to do. That you'd want to move your eyes first as fast as you can, but also reorient your body properly. And so probably a lot of that's genetically determined. So there are sophisticated parts of this that are genetically determined. I assume that you didn't learn to move your head. I assume that that's sort of built in somehow. But it's clearly, there seems that things that are learned. You know, another example is riding a bicycle. People have always commented that when you ride a bicycle, that it's subcortical. I don't know who determined that, but I've read that. Okay, so it's like your brain, you're not thinking about it. It's something subcortical is learning to ride a bike. And clearly riding a bike is not something that's genetically determined. As opposed to like walking and running, you could be. And of course, it's hard to learn to ride a bike. But you can imagine that even bike riding, in some sense, done subcortically like this. That is, you know, you're saying, I need to, you're basically saying, get my body to this location further down the street, or, you know, turn over this way. And subcortically, the system has learned how to do that. And that knowledge about how you do it is not available to the cortex. It's completely hidden to the cortex. You have no idea how you balance a bike. So I'm just giving examples that really say, yeah, I think there's learning going on here, but not everything is learned. And I don't know how it's done. And that's the question.
I have a related question about this. Like in the beginning, we also talked about like attention, or you mentioned about attention and hierarchy. So I think I had this question when Scott brought up, like when we have multiple goals that's outputted, so like by the sensor, unexpected sensor input, or by the learning module, like in code, we have some kind of goal state generator that can pick which goal to pursue out of many goals. But biologically, is that happening in the like top column, or is that happening in the superior colliculus?
Well, when you say a goal here in this figure, I'm showing two goals. One is a bottoms up and one's a top down. Would you call that a goal, or are you saying goals are just things that come from the cortex?
I would say those are goals, yeah.
Well,
Yeah, those two arrows.
well, clearly in some situations, the bottoms up one takes priority.
Right.
That's why I showed it with a bigger arrow there, just to, you know, as in the classroom example, right? Tell the students, focus on this board, don't look at anything else, and the door opens, and they all turn their head, right? So clearly it's hard to prevent that from happening. But, you know, there must be some level of magnitude that comes into play here as well, right? You know,
Yeah.
And an interesting question, one of the questions you just brought up, Jose, which I haven't thought about yet, or at least I haven't been able to make any progress on yet, but I'm kind of reserving my time to think about it. Is like, okay, well, I got a whole bunch of columns in the cortex, right? Who's deciding what we should do? Is it higher up or lower down? You know, what's the order in which these things occur? I have some thoughts about it, but they're not really coherent yet. So, so, you know, there is a question like, okay, in this kind of scenario, you can only attend to one thing at a time, right? You can't attend to two things at once. And so who gets to decide?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to bring up something. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
So just on the topic of learning and plasticity and superior colliculus, brought to mind this study. I never looked into it in detail. I just remembered it. But they put these goggles on a owl, juvenile owls, that would shift its vision by 23 degrees. It would just move all the visual input like 20, you know, some degrees horizontally, right?
Yeah.
And eventually the owls just adapted. So, you know, at first its head movements would be all wrong, right? Because it's trying to orient to stuff, but it's, you know, it's going to be off when it tries to orient to what it thinks is the center, but it eventually would just like adapt, and it would, you know, its optic tectum would adapt as well, you know, to accommodate the shift. But here's the even weirder bit, that now that I'm like looking into it again, is that when they put the goggles on and they'd play a sound, they would orient incorrectly to the sound. Because there's like an auditory spatial map in the superior colliculus, or an optic tectum, and a visual one.
Oh,
And the auditory
Wow.
map tries to calibrate to the spatial map.
Right, right.
So
So-
once it adjusts to the spatial map, then it'll actually it'll move its head wrong. Like if you had just raised it in darkness, this wouldn't be a problem, because it would just its auditory map would never try to align with its now offset spatial map. So there's this plasticity going on in the integration of auditory and spatial maps, and you can remove the prism and the whole owl will like kind of slowly return to the normal state. But there's some plasticity going on there for sure in the mapping.
Right. So this is very much like the inverted glasses that we've talked about with humans, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know about the owl one. That's pretty cool. And in the past, it never occurred to me. I never asked the question: when the learning to convert the inversion, like with the owl, just like you said, could that be subcortical, or is that like a remapping in the cortex? And now at least it's a possibility that the owl and the inverted glasses is happening subcortically, and but I don't think we know yet, right?
To my memory, so this is old knowledge, so I have to check on this, but I think they did staining after using the glasses on the optic tectum, the way they do normal, like cytochrome staining on the so you show a grid and you supply this chemical, and then you immediately sacrifice the animal, and you see where the grid laid over its superior colliculus. So I think it did induce some sort of shift, but that's kind of old knowledge. So I think the argument, at least in this 90s, work, was that the shift was occurring at the level of superior colliculus, which I guess is also supported by the auditory remapping. But
maybe, right? It's hard for me to imagine. Like the clues you gave there, that the fact that the audition was not remapped, but the vision was, says something about the mechanism, but I don't know what it says yet.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think about it.
Yeah.
But it sounds like the audition was remapped together with the vision, right? So like there's just one common body space.
I thought the opposite. I thought you said the auditory was no longer aligned with vision.
It starts no longer aligned with vision, but then it'll creep towards aligning with the now shifted visual.
So it learns to compensate the vision first, but the auditory is now misaligned with vision. Is that right?
Yeah.
Wait, I thought it was that now when you played a sound, it would turn to the wrong location. Like
I think after the auditory map shifts to align with the visual map, then its head motions would be wrong.
Well, wait. So initially, they gave the prism to the owl. The owl learned to compensate just from the vision, and then they play a sound. At that point, is the sound correctly attended to or incorrectly attended to?
I have to figure that out. I think the adjustment of the visual map and the adjustment of the auditory map are both happening, and I don't know at what rate, this one changes and this one happens.
Right. The question is, did they change together or did they change separately? That was the key issue here.
Yeah.
Interesting. Another question came up to me is like, this is superior colliculus, but are there other subcortical structures that may work the same way? There's no evidence I saw that the superior colliculus would control walking, for example. It controls, it can make you move your arms to attend to spaces like reaching something or touching something. It can make your head move, your shoulders move, your eyes move your ears if you can do that, move your whiskers if you can do that. But what about other parts of the body? I don't know. Maybe there's other. There might be something in the spinal cord or brainstem that says for walking or running, it says go to this location and figure out how to walk there. Don't bother me until you get there, type of thing. But I didn't see any evidence that in fish they said the optic tectum did control whole body fish movement. But I didn't see anything for mammals along those lines. So, but there could be multiples of these things. There could be other structures that work the same way for controlling other parts of the body.
It seems like, especially for interacting with the world, you also need a way of telling it what should move to that location. So like, yeah, generally with just attending to a space, sure, you could attend to it by moving your eyes or your finger or whatever, but a lot of stuff, it really matters what you're moving. Like if you want to switch the light on, you can't do that with your eyes. Or if you want to, I don't know, do a dance move or whatever, it really matters which body part you put into which location. So,
Right,
yeah, it,
right.
it
Obviously,
can't
yeah.
just be about location.
And yeah, and the cortex has some sort of control over this too. On the cortex can say, don't move your head while you're attending to this visual space. Right. So what do you conclude from that?
Yeah, I guess that's the kind of big open question for me right now. Is like the mechanism sounds great that we get input of like locations in space to attend to or to move to, but then how does the superior colliculus figure out what to move there and how to move it there, and who decides what moves there and how it moves there, and can we use kind of models in the cortex to support that kind of
Well,
planning to
right.
Yeah.
This goes back to this number 5 I had here, right? What's the boundary between these two? What I like about this idea is it's a way of compartmentalizing problems. So I can think like, oh, we have the learning module, and I'm going to figure out what it does and what it knows. And then I can say, okay, now there's some other things that in the superior colliculus or these other structures, and we can sort of break it apart into 2 parts. And now you're coming up with like, oh, that break is not very clear. Like who decides that you can't, that today I want to use my left hand or whatever. Well, let's take the light switch, for example. The idea that I'm going to turn on a light switch, I might use the finger that's closest to the switch. Well, that might not be cortical. That could be subcortical. Basically, it could be there's somehow in the superior colliculus, it has this map of the body and knows where limbs are somehow. And it says, okay, well, I'm going to move this limb to that location. And it might pick the closest one. Nope, it's easy to reach the left hand. And I don't know. When I try to think of things I do daily through my life, and there's so many decisions like that you just don't think about. You just pick something up. You don't ask, oh, should I use my right hand or my left hand? You just do it. So that suggests to me is a lot of that could be happening subcortically, that someone's deciding, but then the cortex can override it. And the cortex.
But it seems almost like lower than the superior colliculus, if that is like where we attend to, because we don't even attend to those locations. If I walk into a room, I'm attending to some space in the dark room, and as I turn on the light switch, like I'm not even thinking about the light switch. I'm already thinking about where I want to go in that room or where I want to look in that room.
Well, the light switch is definitely a model-based feature of the cortex, right? Where I'm assuming that has to be in the cortex, where the light switch is in the room.
Yeah.
Right. So that I don't have to attend to something that is known, or attention only is things that you're learning or things that are wrong or something like that. So clearly where the light switch is in the room is a model based in the cortex, but the cortex may say, oh, we want to turn the lights on. I need to turn the switch. That's all model-based behavior. But it may not. The cortex may not say anything further about how to do that, unless it is a problem.
Yeah. I just mean like if there's only one bump of activity in body space in the superior colliculus, that doesn't seem enough for the kind of coordinated.
Oh, I see. You're saying I'm attending visually to one place, and then.
Yeah, or even like if I'm driving a car, I have to like move my foot on the pedal, I have to move my hands on the wheel, I have to move my eyes in the world. I can't just have one space that I focus what to move at any point in time.
Go
ahead.
Yeah, for me, related to what you said, and also to number 4, the word that kind of popped into my head was muscle memory.
Yeah.
So I feel like when there's like maybe in my mind, what makes most sense to me is that there's some interplay, like the supercolliculus and also the cortex. What if there's a bump in the supercolliculus, maybe the associate there might be some association with the cortex that says, okay, now execute this kind of sequence of actions, like that that you can just do kind of without thinking, like instead of trying to do one thing at a time, like okay, like do a series of things like without really thinking about it.
You know, continuing on this and also what Vivian just said, it makes me really wonder. I take the driving a car example. Most of the actions you do while driving a car, you're not thinking about at all. Or at least you're not aware that you're thinking about them. They don't seem to be cortical type of things. It's like, and remember, when you're sitting in your car, the movements you have to make to actuate the pedals or other things are very, in some sense, you have a rigid reference frame to do it in because you're located your body in some space, and you could learn just to do these behaviors. You don't have to calculate, you know, any kind of you don't have to figure out how to move your foot to the pedal. There's because your body's always in the same spot in that location. It's like your fingers in the same spot while typing. That those behaviors could be very rigidly learned. These, you know, as you said, the muscle memory type of things. So it's not clear to me I have to attend to those things. It's not clear to me the cortex is even saying, oh, press the accelerator pedal. I mean, the cortex can say that. The cortex can say, oh, I want you to now concentrate, attend to the pedal, move your foot to the pedal. But if you do that, you don't tend to too many other things. But when I'm driving, I could be attending to unusual visual things in the scene around me. But I wonder how much could the actual driving be subcortically learned?
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that part. I'm just thinking that like only this mechanism in the superior colliculus with one bump of activity in a location doesn't seem sufficient. Maybe something like the cerebellum being there for like more coordinated, very practiced sequences of movements.
Right.
What needed as an addition.
I'm hearing it differently. To me, what the superior colliculus, this bump in the superior colliculus means, it means that the cortex, somebody in the cortex wants to or should attend to this. This is the bump represents like this is what we're gonna pass to the cortex, not what activity is going on subcortically. So that's how I interpreted this. It's like that bump is, you know, cortex, assuming it's the cortex is saying, I want to attend to this space, please make it happen. I don't know if the cortex would do multiple of those at once. It's not clear that cortex can attend to two things at once. But there could be a lot of behaviors that are occurring which involve subcortical, cerebellum is a good guess. A lot of details are happening down there. We can talk about that. And other subcortical motor areas are essentially saying these are sort of well-learned practice behaviors that don't take a model, don't take a flexible model. They're you can call them a model, but they're not like the ones in the cortex. And so just do those things. You know, even like while you're driving and you have to speed up and slow down, well, other traffic and move over. And so much. I'm wondering how much of this could be subcortical. Once you've practiced it, of course, a new driver has to think about it very carefully. They have to use their cortex like a kid learning to catch. So the reaction times are slow because the cortex is like looking at these things one at a time, like, oh, do this, no, do this, no, this. But once you've learned it subcortically, it just sort of, you know, it could be just like, oh, you know, I want to get to this exit I see up a tenth of a mile from here, and maybe subcortically does everything until you think about it. You know? Anyway, so it doesn't have to be multiple bumps. I'm trying to get rid of multiple bumps.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, I think that like I really like this mechanism for basically determining where to attend to, where to move the sensor to, and everything. So I'm just kind of trying to take the next step and think about, okay, how do we achieve other kind of goals in the world, like more kind of goal-oriented behavior, changing the state of the world and stuff like that. And if that would also like, which would also need to come from layer 5A outputs. So,
Right. Well, I
yeah.
don't know. I mean, so to me, this was just one little piece in a bigger problem. And I mentioned this, the bigger problem is, okay, how do multiple columns in the cortex work together on behaviors? I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah, no, I'm not disputing anything about this mechanism. I think it's really nice and it also aligns really well with what we do in Monty. I'm just kind of trying to take it further and try to see how we
Right.
could use it for interacting with the world, stuff like that.
I started making some drawings of this. They're not good enough to share. I was trying to redraw the cortex and the hierarchy in columns in a way that would help me understand, what's going on in the hierarchy, and how do multiple columns work together. There's two dimensions to this. Like this one dimension is you've got a whole bunch of columns that are observing the same object. They could be in the same region, or let's say, visual region. And so these columns are all sharing the same object. What does it mean for them to generate behaviors? Because, that's one question. And then the other question is, well, we've got columns that are in different objects in a hierarchical arrangement, composite arrangement. What does it mean for those things to generate behaviors? Because those are different columns. So those are the two basic dimensions I was trying to think about. But I don't at the moment. I mean, this could be a good topic. If we could sort of solve this, make some good progress on this topic in our focus days. Anyway, that's what I'm working on right now. So that's what if I were to continue on, I'd work on that. Like even get a week to prepare for it, maybe come up with better examples or something. Anyway, that seems like a really big thing. It's. I feel like when we were talking about behaviors and behaviors of objects, I kept coming back to the idea that, I don't really understand how multiple columns work together very well. And until we have some sort of framework for that, trying to do anything else beyond what a single column does, it seems kind of impossible or difficult. So that's why I've been focusing on, like, how do multiple columns work together? What does it mean? What do they do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would be a nice continuation and to use the mini focus week to think about how we would extend the action outputs to achieving goals in the world. How could we break down goals? What kind of goals or what kind of layer 5 output would higher level columns have versus ones that are lower in the hierarchy? And yeah, how would they be communicated?
Right. Just think, if we're just brainstorming here, I mentioned earlier that the superior colliculus is probably not the only place that's doing something like this. Because I haven't seen any evidence that it controls anything lower body. There's the arms and the head and the neck and the eyes. So that would be another part of the solution. You get different parts of the cortex. One controlling, whole body movements, another one controlling eyes and heads and hearing or something like that. This goes back to your multiple bumps issue. So part of the cortex could be controlling your limbs driving the car. Another part could be controlling what you're visually and auditorially attending to.
Yeah.
Maybe you've covered this already, Jeff, but is the output from layer 5A, the motor output, do we think of it as unique to the model or not unique to a specific?
I think it's not unique. It has to be, because it's being communicated. It can't be an SDR, at least the way I think of SDRs. it can't be unique to the model because it's being transmitted someplace else. And as soon as you send it someplace else outside of that column, you don't have the model anymore. So it has to be converted either into a movement vector in body space or a location in body space or some other shared space.
This is similar to the layer 6A input, the movement that changes the location and the reference frame.
Well,
Now we just have to...
right. Well, so I've always been arguing that, you know, there's part of the theory is that there's a movement input to the column and there's movement output from the column. My assumption all along has been the movement input is just a movement vector, and it has to get it starts in body space and has to get converted to the model space, and that's what the thalamus was doing. I didn't show the thalamus here, right? So if the layer 5B is the orientation of the model to the world in some sense, or then the movement vector comes from a world's body space, gets converted into the object's model space in the thalamus, and that's also just a you know, it's a vector, it's a movement, like you're moving in this direction at this speed. And then the output, I've always assumed, is also a movement vector. That's not the way Monty does it, but that's a movement vector. So layer 5A would be a movement vector initially in the model of the column, and it has to be converted into the reference frame of the body. And I've speculated it doesn't go through the thalamus to do that, but there was evidence that why layer 5A cells could do that themselves.
So we could also use the layer 6B orientation to change it
layer
back.
6B, right. Layer 6B orientation, which projects to layer 5A.
Right.
And layer 5A has this bursting mode, which is also what you see in the thalamus. So those are the two suggestive clues. That if that bursting mode is just kind of unique for those two cells, if that's related to this conversion somehow. But theoretically, this makes sense, right? The world inside the column is in the model of the object you're modeling, and it's allocentric. And then to interface to the rest of the world, the motor inputs and the motor outputs have to be converted.
Yeah, makes sense.
Right.
I just thought of a great experiment. I wish someone would do, but texting a friend to see if he does superior Colliculus experiments. I don't think he does. But so one thing I've been really curious about is I know V1 communicates directly with superior Colliculus. And on a really simplistic level, they're both retintopically aligned. So it's not super surprising that, you know, something 5 degrees off and 10 degrees down or whatever might be able to just feed directly into superior Colliculus and sort of feed into an activation bump or get an activation bump going. I think the really interesting question, though, from our perspective is, can a column corresponding to, like, say, the center of the vision or off to the 5 degrees to the right, 10 degrees down, can that cause an activation bump in a completely different area of the superior Colliculus? Completely different retintopically mapped area?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, is it body space or is it retinal space?
Yeah.
Right? I've written it as body space. I think that's what the literature says, but I have to be careful about it. I might have misread that. Because you were just describing, Scott, in retinal space, then they'd be aligned, right? The retina. But if it's body space, then there's a misalignment between a column in V1 and where it is in body space. Right, they're not the same. So I don't know the answer to that question, if it's retinal space or body space.
I wonder, you know, maybe if it's just relying on the retinotopic alignment of superior Colliculus in V1, then perhaps it just doesn't need to go through thalamus. But if it actually does need to do something like, I'm proposing a hypothetical place we need to attend to. This column says that.
Oh, I see.
That place to attend to could be way over here to the left or to the right or wherever. Does that coordinate transformation need to go through the thalamus, or can that be kind of done directly?
You still need to do it because the direction I want to go is relative to the model, right? Oh, does it? I don't know. I'm
Yeah,
now. Maybe I don't know.
I think you'd always have to rotate it into the body's reference frame. But even if if it's just relying on retinotopic alignment, I feel like it couldn't send anything very informative, because
Right.
if it can't communicate a location that's not where it currently is, like it could only say, yes, here's interesting, but it's already there. So it's not causing any change.
Right. It is weird. They describe it like this top layer is vision, and then the lower layers are sort of multimodal stuff. They gives this priority to vision, but I'm not sure if that's real or not. This kind of mapping certainly wouldn't work with audition, right? There's, I don't think it would. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't see how it would be super useful, because you'd always want to suggest make it move to a location that you're currently not at, and then that can't rely on retinotopic mapping.
Right. But it is an interesting question, like what I've labeled body space here. Is it really body space, or is it retinal space? Going back to this previous picture, yeah, I'd have to look at these again. Visual map and auditory map. Well, that's not very that's not very clear what that means. They show it here relative to the animal's head. Does that mean it's really relative to the head, or is it really relative to the eyes, or is this an animal that doesn't move its eyes? I mean, I don't know. I'm sure they must know this. Somebody must know this answer to this question. Is that top layer of the Colliculus a retinal map, or is it a visual map around the head of the animal or around the body?
I don't know. It's like the map must extend beyond the visual field, because if you hear something that's outside of the visual field and you orient it to it. So.
Right. Good point. It definitely goes behind the animal.
Yeah.
Right. So this again would this support my idea that the output of the cortex is a movement vector and not a location? Because I don't know how, if the cortex projects directly to superior colliculus, this top layer, I don't know how it would impose a location, the desired location on it. I could see it could move a bump. I don't know. It's confusing. That doesn't make sense. I don't know. It's confusing. As I said, there was a lot of papers on this. I wasn't getting into it. It was started reading them. Maybe it was the afternoon. I was falling asleep, but there is a lot of data on this stuff. If someone wants to feels motivated to look at it. Maybe I'll try to read some before next week.
Yeah, so should we
drop in the research channel if you come across any. I think you say this one's current biology, but
I have a few papers.
If you put the names in there, we have a common paper repository that we're using. So
yeah, think I could figure out how to use that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if you just put the titles in or drop the papers in, I can also just add them to the repository, because I'd be curious to take a look as well.
There were here's a couple things I hear. This from this paper here. This is the I don't know what it is, but this is the link for it. I was thinking they had bats involved in sound creation, head movement, ear movement, eye movement, head movement, shoulder, arm movements, and rodents involved in whisker, head, and body movements. Similar for fish. So that was one paper that would be worth looking at. I had a couple other references here. Yeah. So if I wanted to put that link, where would I put it, Scott?
If you just drop it in the research channel, as long as I can, download those or whatever, I'll just add them to the Zotero.
Right.
and tag them with like superior colliculus or something.
Right. That's all I have.
I
Okay.
have a question.
Yeah.
So this is kind of selfish question because literally writing code, trying to decide which policy to execute in what sequence, as Vivian alluded to. I have a question about, there was a comment of like eyes move, head moves, shoulders move, etc. Is there anything to indicate that the heuristic isn't the fastest sensor first in order to get, inputs as fast as possible, right? So the eye is a faster sensor than a head movement, than a shoulder movement. This kind of correlates in general to even human organizations of usually the fastest sensing apparatus is first on
Well,
target on something.
That was my assumption. I didn't read anything about that, but that would be my assumption, is that the animal's trying to get its eyes fixated on that location as fast as possible, and the eyes are quicker than the head. But the surprising part to me was why that the head moves too, and the shoulders. And you can observe this yourself when you visually attend to something off to your side. You can see you move your shoulders and your head. it's not just your eyes. Anyway, but yeah, I think that's right. That you would but I think that's a pure policy issue that any particular implementation could decide, right? Any kind of that's, to me, is like outside of the thousand brains theory. That's sort of like, okay, in this particular application, in this particular embodiment, what do we want to happen? Well, maybe it's important that the eyes, that we get to move the quickest one first.
Oh, I thought that when you say the eye, head, shoulder, I thought that it was because there's limitations. Like if I want to see something in the back, I can't just roll my eyes back. Like I can
Well,
only...
there is that, but that's not what I was referring to.
Okay. I thought it was because like you could only
No,
roll
you can
that way.
pick a location right now. You can pick a location that you can saccade to. But if I say saccade to that location, watch here. Watch my head.
Right.
I'm going to saccade to the corner of my room here. Okay, there it is. But if I would normally do it, I go like this.
Okay.
My eyes go first, and my head follows.
But it kind of makes sense because you always want to center on that location, because that, like, if you just move the eyes, you have much less periphery now in that further direction. So if you want to keep exploring from there, you want to move the head over, because otherwise, at some point, you're going to have to move the head, which is slower.
Right.
And you'd rather do it now.
I kind of view it as, you're like, okay, you've solved the first problem. You've got your eyes there, but prepare yourself for what might happen next.
Yeah, exactly.
The thing that may happen next may be dangerous. You may need to run, or you may, so if you're kind of body's skewed to the dangerous animal, that's not a good idea. If you have to fight it. So, or as you said, Vivian, maybe you'll need to see more. And you said, damn, I should have put my head because I can't see it now. That was another little interesting point about the superior colliculus. I'll just mention it. There seems to be two modes sometimes. There's an avoidance mode too. So often when you have something that occurs unexpectedly, like you feel something sharp on your skin, you move your arm away from it and your body away from it. Or if you hear something maybe dangerous, you'll turn and move your body away from it as you turn your head. So you're trying to attend to it visually, but with some movements, but you're also trying to avoiding it by moving in other directions. Whereas if the cortex told me to read for the light switch, I don't react by going, oh, okay. I'm not gonna, I guess I'll touch it. So there seems to be these two modes it has. Again, I don't know if that's important for Monty or not, but
my dogs are wondering why I'm jumping around the house, looking away from weird things that aren't there right now.
Here's a question
Yeah,
I
I
had.
think
I
that
don't know. Oh, sorry. I don't know if this came up in your reading or not, but or if you just know it. But I didn't know. I couldn't figure out whether or not the superior colliculus was needed to issue an eye motion. Like
what motion?
To issue an eye motion.
Uh-huh.
That's a COD. Do you have to have a functioning superior colliculus, or can those commands be issued higher in the cortical
Well, the cortex, remember, cortex can't control cortex never controls a muscle. Nothing in the cortex projects to muscles, which is a big clue. So I don't know the answer to your question, Scott, but my impression I've had, which it could be just my belief, which could be false, is that eye movements are absolutely require the subcorticus. There's no that's as far as I know, there's nothing else, but I think they're involved in all forms of eye movement. They are involved in. And in fact, I think the retina only projects to the subcorticus and to the cortex via the thalamus. I don't remember it projecting anywhere else. It might, but I don't remember that. So it's kind of I've always assumed it's an eye related organ.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand that it actually moves other parts of the body.
Yeah, that's surprising to me. I don't think I came across the neck and shoulder orienting stuff at all when I was reading about it. I thought
it's everywhere now. Now
yeah.
I ran across it, it's like in everything. It's all over the place. I got humans doing it, all kinds of animals doing it.
Yeah. I do remember seeing that all these higher visual areas feed into superior colliculus too. So it's not just V1, it's
right. No, right.
So
That's
like
more.
Maybe it is like the actual terminus, the actual interface with the motor system. But I wasn't clear whether or not there was any other pathway that.
I'm not aware of one.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say my knowledge is complete. I'm just not aware of one. I'd be a little bit surprised if there was, but I'm not aware of one.
Yeah, it is kind of challenging to think about. Kind of going back to the work that Tristan and I are working on, and this other sort of salience project, challenge you to think about the fact that the superior colliculus is really sensory and motor. It's like there's no nice clean separation within this organ itself. It does a lot of sensation and also performs a lot of motor commands.
Well, if you can think of it sensory processing, I kind of think of it like it's not. I don't know. We've already talked about this. Cortex is the only place I think that has real learned models of the world.
Yeah.
Objects that can exist in different places and you navigate and all this kind of stuff. And so it makes sense that, there's a primitive mechanism to force the animal to attend to some unexpected input. You could imagine that occurring like you see the optic tectum is that, right? It's behaviors. A fish has no cortex. And so the colliculus is, I guess, it's sensory motor system. It's able to generate behaviors to, avoidance of danger or something like that.
Yeah.
Is it even unexpected sensory input, or is it just salient sensory input? Because if it's unexpected, that kind of implies that it had a prediction, which kind of implies it has learned something.
Well, okay, I would say, right. I was thinking saliency is a kind of unexpected, right? A saliency is something that's salient is a warp in the space-time continuum. I don't know.
But it might also be salient and expected by a learning module, for example. But
right. I guess
salient.
So maybe salient is a bottoms-up thing, and expectation is a top-down thing. How's that? Does that fit?
Yeah.
It's just also like a zeroth order prediction, which is like I just predict that nothing's gonna change. I guess that's kind of a prediction. It's kind of not, it's kind of the trivial prediction because it's gonna tend to motion. If something moves suddenly, it's like, we didn't exactly predict anything about that moving thing. We just it just kind of showed up because it's moving. So I think it's predictive in that sense. It's just like this really low level.
Outside
not like a
current
real world
distribution.
model,
Yeah.
I think a big question is, does it matter if the output of the learning module is a motion or a movement vector or a location as we have it today? It may not make any difference, but that's something we'd want to be comfortable about. And then I think understanding how the cortex and all the columns work together to control this subcortical system is essential. But then the details of how the subcortical system goes about its work are really not that essential for our work. I mean, we'll have to implement things, but it's not like part of the overall theory. So some of these questions we're talking about, you know, do Monty systems need to have, you know, avoidance mechanisms? Do they have to, you know, I don't know, maybe not. So I think if we think about what we're creating as if you want to think about like as an operating system for robotics, then we're defining here, we need to define the border between our operating system, which is all model-based, learned model-based, and the mechanics of the robotic embodiment, which have maybe their own models, but not the kind of models we're talking about. And anyway, that makes me feel happy because then I don't think we have to do all that crazy stuff in the end. We don't have to worry too much about it.
Well, aren't we going to have to teach learning modules to, you know, become a motor cortex though? So aren't we going to still have to learn all that stuff inside learning modules at some point?
I think the hope here is just in that we can learning modules are learning modules, and they don't know what they're controlling. They don't know what appendages are attached to them. They just say, I'm learning a model, I'm getting some input. Stop thinking about, think about higher up learning modules, not getting any direct sensory input. And it's just saying, I'm being fed a series of observations of numbers, and I'm building this model of it. And now I want to achieve some goal, and I'm going to output a series of behaviors to achieve my goal, but my behaviors are all in the context of my model. So if this is true, then it doesn't matter if it's motor cortex or if it's, and sometimes what we just said today is like visual system is partly motor cortex, right? It's like it's generating behaviors of the body, not just the eyes. It's all gets mixed up below in a way that the cortex doesn't need to know about it. The cortex shouldn't have to deal with the fact that, how is this actually physically getting done? It should just be saying, I'm dealing with a hierarchy of models in the world. I'm creating them. I'm moving through them. I want to experience different parts of them. I don't know how it's moving. I don't know how my body is manifest. I'm just doing this stuff. And of course, the cortex can then learn a model of like a model of ourselves, just like, like looking in a mirror, we learn of ourselves. But that's a different type of model.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we would still kind of automatically learn a model of our body because we are like some columns are getting sensory input, like proprioceptive input from our limbs and stuff like that. So we would like, since we're perceiving our body, we will inevitably also model it. But then the question is, I guess, how much are these models required for motor policies? Maybe we need them for like doing complex movements for the first time. Like if we learn a new dance or something, we have to think a lot about how to move different parts of our body.
As an adult, when you learn a new dance, you're basically piecing together existing components that you know already. And, a professional can do that right quickly. Yeah, I don't know. I think all this will become clear soon. At least I'm hoping it is. I always want to go back to the learning module and the cortical column. It's a bunch of neurons that don't know what they're doing. They just build models, and the models are just these structural things of reference frames and features and orientations, and that's it. And the more we can sort of divorce ourselves from thinking about, oh, this model is moving the fingertip, the better off we are. Instead, today I'm saying, oh, the model's saying I want an input from this location in my allocentric space. Please make it happen. And it doesn't know if that's a fingertip or an eye patch or something else.
So yeah, in terms of the mini focus week next week, do you think it would be a good topic to, yeah, basically keep talking about how how the cortex outputs motor commands, but maybe with a particular focus on motor commands for changing, like doing more complex things than just moving a sensor, but like actually changing the state of the world, using our behavior models to figure out that, and also kind of the interaction between learning modules and how they might break down goals together, or what the outputs of higher level learning modules could be.
Well, there's two things. You're asking me, I'll give you my opinion about that. There's two things in there. I think folding in behavior models is one thing. Today, I was trying to avoid doing that. So I was trying to figure out, like, how can I even understand just inference and learning of morphological models in a hierarchy and understand behaviors related to that. But I think unfolding in behavior models is a good thing too, but doing them together, it might be really hard. I found that difficult. So, maybe we could do two things next week. I'd be happy to try to have some diagrams to talk about what I was just mentioning earlier, like how do we understand the stuff I was just talking about in a hierarchy of multiple learning modules, and just like even just for inference and learning. And then we could take a separate approach to talk about how we integrate behavioral models into some part of the system, because that's an important topic too. I just think if we combine those two together right now, it might be hard.
Yeah.
It's sort of like maybe we look at it from two different directions. If someone wants to take a stab at like, okay, how do behavioral models lead to, goals and actions? That'd be great.
Yeah.
I think the broad theme that I'm kind of thinking about right now is multiple columns working together vertically and horizontally. It's sort of like a, yeah.
Right, but
Yeah.
I think Vivian's bringing up the behavioral models too, right? So
Right.
I think it would be great to talk about behavioral models next week. I just don't know how to do that right at the moment. I'm afraid to add it to the thing I'm currently thinking about.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I guess I was kind of bringing it back because we started talking about actions and how to do them and all that. And then we figured out, oh, we really need to understand behavior models first before we can figure this out. And then we went and did a real deep dive on behavior models. And I feel like we have a much better understanding of them now. So it'd be cool to be able to fold them back in and see if that helps us now understand goal-oriented behavior. But it's definitely also a good point that we also haven't really figured out the hierarchy part and actions yet. So, and that's another huge topic. So yeah, we don't have to focus on both at once for sure.
Right. Well, if we're lucky, we'd be able to do something about it. What I thought might be useful, again, I'll just put it in different words. I would be happy to lead a discussion about the hierarchy extension of what I just talked about today. And if you or someone else wants to do a discussion about behavior models, it's sort of independent of what I'm going to talk about, but in any way you want to talk about it, I think that'd be good. It'd be like we could do one day on one and the next day on the other, and then we could, it'd be sort of jostling our brains a bit.
Yeah, there might be some interesting interactions between the two as well.
Right. I'm just, if I personally cannot sign up to say, oh, I'll lead a discussion on the integration of behavior models in a hierarchy with a superior collection. I'm like, I can't do that. I can barely think anything these days. So
yeah, I'd be happy to think some more about that part of it. I'm not sure if I can present anything concrete by next week, but
yeah. Or maybe, maybe Scott and Jose can, or maybe a group of you can work on that. I don't know.
Yeah. But I think we have a general 3-day plan.
Rami can integrate them all. Go for Rami. We all thought about these problems a bit and try to come out, think about how do we approach the problems, but
Yeah, I guess
And-
another good thing to think about would be what are some good concrete examples we can think through. Because I feel like that's always helped us in the past, like the stapler
Right.
for behaviors and
Right,
helping them and
right.
stuff. What would be one for a behavior?
A behavior that involves actions or just object behavior in general?
Yeah, I guess a good example that might require different levels of hierarchy for it, and a good example that might require behavior models or models of how to change the state of the world.
I see.
The
Yeah,
light switch maybe was a good example. That Scott I think brought up a while ago. The
Right.
lamp with the light switch on it.
right. I mean, that's nice because it's quite simple.
Yeah, but it's
Um,
still hierarchical, like both the lamp in itself and not
it's
sure what the
multimodal.
Yeah, that
Right.
too.
I don't know if it's hierarchical yet. I mean,
Well, there's the lamp which has a child object that is the switch,
right,
and
right. God, I'm thinking like, okay, we're gonna do
That
this.
was- yeah. Oh, sorry.
I think we're gonna do this Wednesday. I'm trying to count the days I'm gonna be able to work on this before Wednesday. Because there's so much to think about. Uh,
One example I was thinking was tying your shoe. I
oh
feel
gosh.
like
that was
okay, too
hard.
difficult. Okay, I thought that was like easier than can of worms, but harder than lamp.
That's pretty much it. That is literally a can of worms, or the can of two worms. Okay.
I feel
Okay.
like we should pick an example that like 1-year-old can do already, and not like I don't know at what age you learn how to tie your shoes.
I'm still trying to learn how to tie my shoes. You know, I get a new
I
pair of
was so
shoes.
bad at it.
They get a new pair of shoes and they have different types of laces, different holes for them, and they don't work anymore. They get untied, or
Yeah.
oh, that's funny.
I don't know if this helps with like just trying to from my current context, maybe this is too simple of a problem, but right now, like I have a very concrete decision to make between look at something and go and teleport to that place. And so I'm wondering if like a simple test case would be, agent's presence in a location causes an effect that's observable, but looking at that location does not cause that effect. And so it's a very simple two policy choice. You either look at it or you move to it. There's no other motor system embodiment to worry about, etc. You either look or you teleport.
Well, that's an interesting idea, but then how does that apply to touch? I mean, somatosensory, I can't. Think of it. Think how I touch the audition or touch, because in audition I can attend to it, but I can't move to it. But in touch, I have to move to it to sense it.
I guess presence at location would be an analog of touch, because the agent is just a point ghost, and with 3D coordinates. So touch could be I'm at this coordinates basically.
Yeah.
It can be either way, right? For now, like it doesn't matter in the downstream. Like in a policy, you can have multiple viable options, multiple viable actions that we can just randomly choose. Like we can either go look at it or like teleport there, match play. It will only kind of favor one or the other when like in downstream, like if we have to be near it for whatever manipulation, then probably we will learn to favor going over there instead of just looking at it. But I don't know. This is a very RL like approach. It just there's a policy, like there's some available actions. You pick it by probability.
Yeah, I would, you might be right, Tristan. But my preference is to find something where cortical columns don't know that distinction necessarily. Yeah, for example, I could turn the light switch on by using a stick and not moving my body there. I could turn the light switch on by clapping if I have one of those clapper lights, I could turn it on by talking to Alexa, I mean, so there seems to be a continuum of actions and their consequences, some of which we think requires presence of the body, but lots of them don't. So I have to solve both of those problems. So it'd be nice if there was a solution that was sort of generic. It didn't make that hard case decision, you know. I can't express what that solution is, but I'm just thinking it'd be nice if it was one. So often the consequences of our actions do not require physical interactions with things. You know, I speak words, people do things, make sounds. Yeah. I mean, in some sense, I want to turn the light on. I push the button to turn the light on. I don't push the button to push the button. You know, so I don't go to the light and turn it on. Or, you know, I could, but I don't know. All right, well, these are all the mysteries of this.
So yeah, sounds like we have enough things to talk about for next week.
But so the plans, we'll do one day of, we'll talk about this, like, at least I'll try. I'll see if I can do it. I'll try to prepare for one of those days to talk about extension, what I just did now, but it's like, okay, what if I had a hierarchy in multiple columns? How do I think about them interacting with something like the Colliculus? What happens when multiple columns are sending information? What would they be doing? How do they communicate with each other? And then someone else, maybe Vivian, other people or whatever, will also think about problems related to behavioral models and goal-oriented behaviors.
Yeah, maybe we start with yours on Wednesday, because I feel like that's kind of going to be a bit of the basis as well for, like, it will tie in a lot with
Right.
enacting behaviors.
Assuming make some progress on it, then yes, it would be helpful.
Well, yeah, it sounds like you have a more concrete idea of what to present now than I have. So
I have a more concrete idea of what the problem is. I'm not sure I have a way of presenting it yet. I'll work on it. I'll have something by Wednesday. I just don't know what it'll be. I'll have something.
Yeah, I feel like we will definitely have enough things to talk about. If we run out of things on Wednesday already, we'll just start talking about the lamp and the light switch. And I think Rami, you said you had some things you might be able to present as well.
I just don't know how much relevant they would be. It's mostly about how columns work together and voting and.
Well, that's helpful.
I'll prepare some slides.
All right. Well, I mean, the things I'm working on now have to do with voting as well. You know, I'm kind of trying to come up with like an Uber theory about, okay, you know, the outputs of multiple columns is a single object ID, and I can't even express it. It's visual things, but it all has to do with, you know, oh, who can vote on what do they know? Then, because voting is in some sense, voting is the essence of the original idea I had for hierarchical temporal memory, which is that information gets information that occurs over time gets pooled into a common representation, and that's what voting is.
Yeah, my thoughts are around the same topic.
Yeah. So anyway, as I started digging into this, I kind of realized I just don't really have a really deep sense of everything that's happening yet.